Welcome to the Tom Nelson podcast. Today, I'm happy to have Vijay Jayaraj. Very happy to have you here from India to talk about maybe energy and climate change. And could you introduce yourself to get us going?
Yeah, I'm an environmentalist. I began my life in India and I did my master's in environment from the UK. Eventually worked in climate research uh, and the energy sector before I started working with a couple of NGO non-profits in the US and in the UK. Yeah. So my journey has taken me through conservation, climate impact on marine life, uh, the use of renewable energy, and all the way up to how industries adapt to change in energy sector. So it's been a quite a diverse experience so far.
Excellent. Yeah, you grew up in India and then you went to CRU, right, or East Anglia?
The University of East Anglia,
Yeah.
which is also the home to Climate Gate scandal.
Yeah, and you were there during ClimateGate, right?
Yes, it was on afternoon that the actual leak information got to the campus and classes ended abruptly.
Okay, what was that like then in the next week or two, just being right there
Yeah,
at East Anglia?
in hindsight, we can see the whole episode. But when we were there, we didn't have much information except that some of the systems were compromised. So all the staff and the students and anyone on the campus were asked to, you know, change our passwords, the usual protocols. But it did not dawn onto me what I was witnessing until after a few years when I started delving deeper into what the media dismissed as nothing.
And some of the people named in the ClimateGate emails, were they professors or people that you knew from the school?
uh, I mean, I did not personally know them, shared the same buildings, and uh, Dr. Phil Jones was in fact part of the University of East Anglia's environmental department. So in that sense, yes, but I personally did not know them. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just curious, during the next month or so, was it a hot topic of conversation that people were very interested in how it was being perceived in the media, or not a big deal?
Yeah, I wasn't a climate realist yet. So
Okay.
I was more focused on finishing my academics, and I was interested in, completing my papers. And so I did not pay much attention to it.
And what were you studying right then at that time?
I was doing my master's degree in
Okay.
environmental sciences. Yeah.
So there was a time when you kind of believed that CO2 was a hazard, the Earth was getting too warm. I believed it at one time.
Yeah. It's like it's what we are taught from the mid 2000s, especially with Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. His movie was like, a pedestal for the climate movement. But we do know from research that it's been going on for like 3 decades. So growing up and, the standard has been set in the media that there are certain media houses that are trustworthy. For instance, BBC, and some are very popular, like The Guardian. And so we tend to, consume that as factual because of the trust we have in that. And you don't have much professors critically analyzing the climate subject, especially in developing parts of the world back then, unless you are an expert. So I'm talking about general professors who teach environmental sciences. So both in academia and the media, you don't get a chance to critically evaluate uh, the claims that are being made.
Okay.
So it was natural for a guy like me from a third world country, stepping onto the West and knowing that CO2 is the problem and humans are killing the planet. So
Okay.
that's what I grew up with, and that's what I believed was true.
Okay. So what was your journey towards climate realism then after that? That was after college?
Yeah. So after college, I came across nonprofits and even people in academia who did not share the same thought as the popular mainstream narrative. This happened because I was on a a huge search like any other graduate would, to find a job, to have a network of environmentalists, and that's what you do. You want to get a job, make use of the degree that you got, and you spent a lot obviously on the degree as well. So during that process, I came across individuals in universities and in nonprofits raising some key questions, and that's when I had a chance to look at the other side of the dialogue, and what it was all about. So that's how I began to know some of the things that were not so concrete, and things that were actually preached to us as facts, whereas in scientific language they were just theories being forced as facts. Yeah.
You and we've been DMing for a while. I've been very impressed by the writing that you've done, and I've been impressed. I just watched you on the Alex Epstein podcast. I think you're doing fantastic work. So you want to talk about what you're doing now, and what your major thrust is, or your message is right now?
Yeah, I'm basically a climate researcher, and I work as a research associate with the CO2 Coalition, Virginia-based nonprofit whose major objective is to inform the public about the benefits of CO2, and to inform the world about the other side of climate narrative, which is looking into the so-called facts about global warming being a killer of the earth. So their primary task is to inform through facts from peer-reviewed journals. They bring about awareness to the public. So I'm a part of their team, and I'm also a contributor to the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. It's another nonprofit based in the US. And apart from that, I do write regularly for a dozen publications in the US, and a couple of them in the UK. So that I've been writing for the past 5 years. So my work mainly revolves around uh, defending the energy rights of those in developing countries. So I try to bring in the perspective of somebody who's in the developing country, and to help those in the West understand the reality of energy poverty, and on a day-to-day basis what it means for the people here. So things that are taken for granted over in the West, it's like a luxury here in the developing part of the world. So it's quite important that people understand what they do when they stand for a certain policy, and when they support a certain policy. Yeah, so that is one of my passion. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about what you've seen in India from when you were a kid until now, in terms of the electricity rollout and anything else you've seen? Things are developing and getting better, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm 36, but we still have power outage. So today morning there was a power outage for 30 minutes, and fortunately there is a power backup where I live. But it's not so the case for majority of people in a country like India where I live. The country has 1.3 billion population, and the majority of them do not have reliable energy access. And going back to my childhood, like it was very common for us to have candles and matchsticks readily available in all houses, and even oil lamps. It was a regular feature, the power cuts, and sometimes, yes, it was a surprise, but more often it was a rolling blackout, more like what we see in South Africa, especially Cape Town. In the last couple of weeks, we've been having heavy load shedding. So yeah, it was part of the life, and like growing up, I never knew that having a 24-hour power supply is like normal, and it's something that people in the West are used to. It came as a surprise, and yeah, I believe my first year outside India, in the UK, I could not really believe that there was electricity all the time, and I had to unlearn and relearn about life and about living and what energy access means and all that. Because energy poverty, which a term used to describe those who do not have access or whose access to electricity is unaffordable. So growing up in energy poverty, even from a middle class family here in India, like I felt we had a lot of power cut and a lot of trouble, and the situation for the poor was even worse. So, for example, we have families who cannot afford to pay the monthly power bills, and those who do not have a power supply, and especially I lived in an urban area, but meeting my relatives in rural areas, like one of the thing that always strikes me is that well, I'm now going to a village or a town where I knew there won't be any the ceiling fan, to cool down during a hot tropical afternoon, because there was no electricity. And India is a primarily an agrarian country, where agriculture is the primary occupation. And for every farmer in India, the electricity was more important for to run their electric motors to pump out waters to their fields. And that's what they looked electricity. That is the thing that they expected most to make use of whenever they had power supply. So we used to have a time when the government would announce few hours of electricity supply. So you get electricity supply only during those hours. So now there is a turnaround where you have only a few hours of electricity disruption. So things have changed a lot, and one of the reasons is India's strong policy to utilize the coal reserves in the country, and build more coal plants and use them. So we had 2 decades of coal proliferation, and there's a strong correlation with that and the development of the GDP and the economy and people's livelihood. So there's a direct link, and it's pretty straightforward. When a household or a community or a city or a town has reliable energy access, everything else will follow. The economy will build, and there'll be manufacturing. People will be using electricity for important tasks, like even for students to read, information through digital media, even TV and radio, even like simple things. And for farmers, as I said, they use a lot of different things that require electricity. So that was a transformation that I saw from my childhood. During my childhood, it was very worse. And as I told you, like we would wait for those few hours of electricity when we went to the villages to meet our relatives, even stay a couple of days there. Yeah.
Is there a big push at all in India right now to not use coal because it's evil and try to power the country on wind and solar?
No, there isn't a big push.
Good.
So what I would say is, among the urban dwellers and among those who subscribe to English news media, there's a tendency to follow whatever the media says. And that is why I believe, like, it's hard for me to meet anyone in urban centers that would agree with my climate realism stance, because they believe and trust certain sources. And so when it's provided or put in front of you in a way which is like very convincing, it's hard for you to negate that, especially when certain authorities, like the head of you, and or a politician whom you respect, or a media narrator in England whom you respect. When these people tell you about climate change, it's hard for them to say no. And hence they believe that fossil fuels are creating a problem. And so that is what is among the people. When it comes to people who are below the poverty line and very close to the poverty line, they hardly consider this as a problem because they have more urgent matters to attend to. And with regard to the policymakers, in the non-profit sphere, in the sphere of all the organizations that get funding from abroad, they're all in line with the mainstream narrative. And they in fact give policy recommendations to the government to cut down emissions in every possible way. So that is the reality here. But thankfully, the officials who are in charge of generating power and supplying transportation fuels to 1.3 billion people know what it requires to do that. And hence, there's a dichotomy, that a divergence of thought even within the government. No, now I'm not talking about politicians, but even the non-political administrative heads and leaders within the system. There's a divergence of thought because on one hand you have a pressing need, on the other hand you have people who really believe, and this is not to mock them, this is like they sincerely believe that it's a problem. So the push has not been there, but there's a push for renewable installations. So that is very prominent. The push for renewable installations is very prominent, but there's no major push for doing away with coal immediately, except for among non-profits. And we have like many climate activists like Greta. In India, we have many. Even in my city, and there was one person who came up in the news today, and she visited Washington DC, I believe. So yeah, that's the reality over here. So the government, in fact, is aiming for more coal plants and more coal use. And there are, but you might hear contradicting voices within the government, but that's how it plays out here. Yeah.
And I think I heard on a previous podcast, you said that at some point recently they rolled out electricity to at least every village in India, right? Not that every person has it, but every village does have electricity now. Is that correct?
Yeah, every village does. Yeah, that's the truth. And it's official statistics by the government and the departments that are concerned with power. So that's the reality. The only problem is that the transmission networks are not yet fully complete. And by that, I mean that there's still some connectivity problems, and the way power is transmitted, some regions grow very fast, and it takes a while for the network to catch up to provide and transmit enough electricity. But if you take the demand and the supply, we now have surplus. India has surplus and has been having surplus since 2017. And the government is making sure even during peak hour demand that there is a surplus. So that's a great feat for because there's, of course, you can only compare with China. Because there isn't a country that has 1.3 billion people, and especially given that we are behind China in GDP and economy, and we do not have authoritarian type of government like China does. This feat is commendable, and it's not just overnight. It has happened since the 2000s. So in the 1990s, India became more liberal with its economic policy, allowing foreign direct investments. And into the 2000s, it was established that coal is critical for electricity. And of course, only nuclear is better, but it takes a long time to build nuclear plants. But we've been fortunate to have a lot of nuclear plants. We have reactors supplied to us from Russia, Canada, and and we regularly buy uranium. So my own province or state here in India has a couple of big nuclear plants which produce electricity, but their percentage is very minimal. And so the coal is the primary electricity provider. And given that the rainfall, we call it the monsoon here in South Asia. So the monsoon rainfalls are very erratic. So you cannot fully depend on hydro electricity. Hydroelectric power. So if there's a drought year like 2016 with a strong El Nino, So you can't do anything, like you can't depend on that. So India has made sure that it has sufficient coal in hand. That a few scary moments happen from now and then when the coal reserves run low in the coal plants over here in India. But the government is doing all it can to make sure that there's enough coal. And I just want to reiterate, by government I mean the administration, and this is not to do with any politician. Yeah.
Do you mine coal yourself in India, or do you mostly get it from elsewhere?
Yeah, we mine coal. Generally, the coal that's required for the power plants are mined here in India. The coal that is required, the high grade coal that is required for the steel plants, usually come from abroad. So we buy coal from the usual suppliers, Indonesia, Australia, South Africa. They all provide us coal. And Australia's supply to us increased after they had a Cold War like situation with China last year. So we had more Australian coal coming our way
And you
since
say
then.
that is higher grade coal, or that Australia has higher
Yeah,
grade
yeah,
coal? They
yeah,
do. Okay.
higher grade coal. So yeah, but in a first of incidents, this year the government is allowing coal plants that are located closer to the sea to use imported coal, because the demand is so high this year because of post-pandemic growth and skyrocketing economic demand for electricity. This year the government is allowing even coal plants to use high grade coal from abroad. Yeah. So but in general, India produces around 70 to 80% of the coal it needs, and majority of the coal that's used for electricity is from within the borders. So that's why we have a regular expansion of coal mines, new coal mines being commissioned, and India has this unique way of improving coal mines and commissioning new ones by using a tender system where they open new coal mines for taking. So whichever private player wants to buy and use the mine, they can do that. So they are trying out new methods to make sure the coal supply increases, and we have high targets. So each year the target that was set earlier is being surpassed. Like so let's say if there was a 900 million tons per year target set for 2023, it is being revised regularly year after year. So now it would be like 1.2 billion tons by 2025, and so on. So they are planning to increase it all the way through until 2030, and beyond that, International Energy Agency and even India's own economic policy draft in 2021 said that coal and oil, they will be still the primary source of energy even in 2047. The government is doing all it can to increase production so that we depend less on imported coal. But the demand is in a way where we are importing more and more coal as well.
And how about the use of oil and natural gas? Do you have your own supplies of that, and do you use much of those for transportation and heating and things? Either one of those?
India unfortunately doesn't have much oil reserves. So it's a big importer of oil, and that's why it's been accused of funding the war in Russia because it's buying Russian oil. But our external affairs minister was very clear last month that Europe was using Russian gas even when the conflict began. And in fact, Europe gave much more money to Russia in trade transactions than what it funded Ukraine. So he made that point, and clearly, like, if you are the energy minister, you need oil from every source you can. And India says, like, if the US blocks Venezuelan oil, like, where do we go? And some time ago, there was a ban on Iranian oil. So for us, yes, we want to be on the right side of the politics, but the demand for transportation fuel is high as well. And 2021 and 2022 saw the highest increases in gas prices. By gas, I mean petrol and diesel. That's what we call it here in India. So there was a huge increase in price, and even now it's very high. And so that is despite buying oil from Russia. So the people would be in deep trouble, like if we don't buy oil. And we are a big importer of oil. And besides being an importer, we also collaborate with governments. For instance, in Africa, we have our state-owned oil firms here in India have collaborations with uh, governments in Africa to refine oil, to extract oil, and so on. So there are a lot of projects going on. And for instance, the US and India have a oil exploration team that has been phenomenal in its work in Indian Ocean Basin. In discovery of oil. And when it comes to gas, again, India is in the big importer of gas, and we do have gas reserves, but there's a lot of anti-fossil activism, and with fund flowing from abroad, there's been a lot of protests, and these protests, and through legal means, they managed to stop government sanction, not the word sanction, I would say government approved uh, oil and gas projects, hydrocarbon projects are being stalled because of climate activism and anti-fossil fuel activism. And the same reasons they told to the public in the UK to not do fracking has been going on here. And so that has stalled India's extraction of gas reserves. The government has identified the gas reserves here in India and has been very keen on utilizing those reserves. Yeah. But as I said, there's a lot of impedance to that. And we have like people protesting on the streets. In some cases, in my province, for example, people from one church, they came to the street along with the protesters and protested. So the waters are very muddled. Like a lot of things are going on. You have grassroots paid activism, like distribution of pamphlets which carry scientific misinformation, despite despite the court and a green tribunal and the government okaying certain projects, they've been stalled because of protests.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to me that there are people in Western countries that maybe are sitting in Minnesota or someplace where the power so far has been on all the time and our homes are heated and everything. And they think they're doing a great thing by fighting fossil energy for the people in India. I'm just amazed that this is still happening. It makes me sad and angry that it's happening.
I mean,
Yeah.
that is one of the things that I want to communicate to people in the West, especially the US,
Yeah.
where I try to inform the public about the reality over here. And it's easy to forget. So even for a person in India, if he's living in a city like Mumbai or Delhi or Chennai, what happens is that, like, if you're living for 5-6 years and you have a regular power supply, it's easy to forget what's happening in rest of the country. And so when so we cannot blame the people in the West completely, because uh, they are they are unaware, and the media has played the topic in a certain way where they don't think it's a problem. And somebody has to teach them that the connection between fossil fuels and why it is a reliable and affordable energy source for a country which is which needs millions of dollars of foreign funds for basic development, like building over bridges, building dams, basic stuff. Even for that, the country requires foreign funds. It's in such a state. So when developing countries are in such a state, like you could imagine what the people are going through. and the lack of reliable energy supply. You cannot entirely blame, but you can inform, and that is happening. And yeah, so that's my take. I don't blame the people there, but it takes a lot of effort to compete with the established media houses to grab attention and tell people in a convincing manner the reality of energy poverty. Yeah.
So there are do-gooders in the West that actually are trying to prevent banks from lending money for coal projects in India, right? Is that something you're seeing, that they're getting in the way of bank lending, or no?
Yeah, bank lending, that's a
Yeah.
problem in Africa. So
Okay. All right.
they the pro climate act camp has managed to convince the African Development Bank to stop funding coal projects in Africa. So you have, imagine you are in a even in a relatively developed part of Africa. You don't have roads, you don't have tar on your road, you have mud road, and you don't have enough gas stations, and you do not have reliable electricity, and you do not even have nutritious food. And what your government is being told by the African Development Bank is that they will not give money for coal projects which can provide reliable electricity. With electricity, everything changes in villages and in towns. So imagine your situation. Like I cannot get into their shoes and tell you what it is to be like, because I'm living in India, which is in a totally different economic state. But for those in Africa, for their key funder and all the other traditional fund sources in Europe, all of a sudden closing their doors for fossil fuel projects is not so good. And I've heard many analysts say this is where China stepped in, and the politics of it is a whole different topic. But they are through their Road and Belt initiative, they are funding a lot of countries in Africa, and they are involved in fossil fuel projects. So
Really?
yeah, so it is sad. And even like I remember when the current administration took power in the US, one of the key things that the president told was that they will make sure that funding for fossil fuel in developing parts of the world is curtailed, not just in developing part, across the globe. So that is a shocking news. But then as a person from developing country, we cannot really blame them. Like, we are still if we are getting funds, we do not have the authority to tell what they should fund it for. So in that sense, we are powerless. But uh, countries like India and China and others can adapt, and they are resilient. But for countries that are poor in Africa is a whole different issue. And like you don't have electricity in your hospital for the surgery. And
Yeah.
so cutting funds is like cruel, like it's like blood on their hands. So uh,
Absolutely. So
yeah.
yeah, and when you cut off their fossil fuel supply, it's not just that you're cutting out their electric lights, right? You're talking about how they need fossil fuels to build better roads and to run the vehicles that are going to be driving on those roads, and all sorts of things, refrigeration for food, and tons of things. You're just you're doing a cruel
Yeah.
thing by cutting off their fossil fuel supply. And I don't know, it doesn't seem like this is that hard of a concept that people could look into it before they don't dedicate their life to cutting off fossil fuels in Africa. You'd think they would look into it a little bit, but I guess not. They've been so brainwashed by the whole idea that climate change is going to kill Africans that they're doing the Africans a favor, I guess.
So I just, as a part of my research during my work term in one of the organizations, we looked into energy poverty in the US, and especially in places like Arizona, California, places that get really hot in summer. And there, the energy poverty was among people who could not afford air conditioning. So we are talking about people on trailers and people who are homeless. And the main issue there we found out was uh, lack of lack of access to equipment or a fan that could, cool them down. That was a main concern, and that is true everywhere else. Uh, so to say that Africans, will die of climate change when what they really need is access to technology, is something that's, you cannot fathom that. Regardless, as you said, I once wrote an op-ed talking about my attempt to live without fossil fuels for a day. But it turns out almost 90 plus percentage of things that I use on an everyday basis is a petroleum byproduct, hydrocarbon byproduct, or made using a hydrocarbon byproduct. So the only things that were not, fossil fuel byproduct were a banana leaf, which is used as a traditional vessel or a plate here in Asia to eat your food. So not just to pack it, we use a full size banana leaf to eat. So that was one thing that was non-fossil fuel. But I still believe that that leaf was carried to the urban center that I live using a truck that ran on fossil fuel. So I mean, everything from your toothbrush to our toilets, to our bed, to the clothes that we wear, even some of the placards and the ink that the climate activists use to protest against. And you now have the Just Stop Oil protests in the UK, and they are wearing clothes and safety jacket, which is all like fossil fuel, and you wonder how come people do not know this. Well, it's not a difficult thing to understand, because even I never thought all these products are fossil fuels or hydrocarbon byproduct. Like even wind turbines and even the windmill structure, like everything has to come from fossil fuels. Not everything, a lot of it, the paint, the energy required to manufacture those structures. Of course, you have rare earth minerals which make them even more toxic. I'm talking about wind and solar tech. So almost it looks like um, whatever was a blessing, whatever made life better for humans, and even become environmental friendly. If you look at the West, they became environmentally more efficient as there was an increase in fossil fuel products that we use every day on an everyday basis. So it has all changed, and it is all narrative. It is almost like there was a switch, they switched on, and the media, excuse me, the politicians, and the international institutes, everybody aligned, and it's like an orchestra, and we just have to applaud and stand and applaud, and that's what they expect from us. Yeah, it's that's the situation now. Yeah.
You probably know these numbers better than I do, but I think the US is way more forested now than it was 100 years ago, because I think people were possibly burning so much wood before they started to use fossil fuel. Maybe it's the case in England as well. But right now, if you cut off our supply of fossil fuel in Minnesota, pretty much every tree would get cut down this winter, I think, as people tried to stay warm. So that's just one example of fossil fuel. It can be good for the environment.
In fact, the BBC, of all the people, the BBC exposed that a British power plant, which has billions of fund for being renewable and pro-renewable, was actually cutting down primary forests in Canada and shipping the wood pellets to UK to burn them. So it's funny that they want us to go back in time, be like Flintstones,
Yes. Yeah.
So it's crazy. And if you think, as you said, forestry is growing across the globe, not in every part of the world, but in general. And for instance, Europe has registered, as a whole, has registered an increase in forest area, and some percentage of it can be credited to the forestry industry, where they plant forests and use the wood to construct houses and other products that we need on an everyday basis. So that is helping in the increase of forest area. And even in country like India, in its official census report of wildlife report. It has indicated that the forest area has grown. And this is a report by scientists. So they've used satellites, they've used other census methods to establish that. And considering that the rate of population growth that there is in India, it is quite remarkable that through an efficient conservation policy that is not mixed with other crazy theories, you can achieve success. And India has done that with the tiger numbers. Tiger numbers have doubled in the wild, the Indian tiger. So yeah, countries, if they plan, they can sustain their forest areas and even grow new forest areas, provided it helps in whatever goals they have. But this should not be mixed with the climate discussion, and which is usually the way. It's like a vegetable soup. Like they want to mix everything, and you cannot get away. You cannot think about any issue if you do not include climate in it. So that's a very wrong way to look at it. When the forest area is increasing and the conservation policy is helping it, why mix it with climate? And even this truth is not being told. Like I've written some op-eds, but I'm sure like a lot of people do not know what's like why the forest area is increasing. And going back in time, like in 16th 17th century, there was a little ice age. And I used to think it was primarily in Europe and in northern hemisphere alone. But it was last year when I came across a lot of papers documenting similar failure of crops and plants even in southern hemisphere. So people need to be made aware of the climate history. Much of it is being attacked and erased by those who don't want people to think. So that's why you have this popular image on the internet where there is a chart that turns from blue to red, and the red is now, which is getting hotter. Or you have the graph, the hockey stick graph by the famous scientist Michael Mann, where it suddenly the temperature spikes, and there was no spike any time before. So there are some ways in which the public has been misled.
Yeah. What do you think the best way is for us to fight back?
Yeah, I think the best way is to communicate the truth and be more precise about it.
Yeah.
Talk less about people and talk more about ideas. So people will know at some point that what's happening. And that's been happening in the past couple of years. There's been a lot of things where people have, it was almost like people woke up and like suddenly realized that things need to be critically analyzed. So yeah, the way forward is quite difficult. No matter how powerful the thinkers are and how ingenious people tend to be, those who hold the staff of power in the hand have undue advantage. And the way the media is censored, and we now even have discussions in parliament and Congress where uh, an opposition uh, member of Congress or member of parliament can completely ignore what you ask and move on to a different subject. And that, like, it's basically whoever gets to power decides to do what they want. And so it's quite politically inclined as well as to how we should approach it. So it's tough to say, but we should keep on harping on the truth and for people to see it. And especially for the people in academia to understand and not forget the scientific process of critically analyzing and appraising things rather than submitting to the popular or the dominant narrative even within the academia. Yeah.
So do you have many other folks from the CO2 Coalition that are based in India? Or no?
No, it's just me outside of the US. I'm the only one. So we have a couple of members from Brazil who now are with us in the US. So we are quite a small team, and so yeah, I'm the only one who's from outside of North and South America.
Any chance you can make it to the US for that Heartland conference coming up in February, in Orlando?
Yeah. I'm hoping that I'd be making myself available for that, and I hope to be there. And if I get a chance, I would like to, inform, the attendees about the reality of energy poverty in other countries, and add whatever I could to really help people understand the reality of climate politics.
That sounds great. I plan to be there too, so maybe we can meet in person there. That would be fun.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
I do have one question that was lingering from the past there. You mentioned the load shedding back there in South Africa, the planned load shedding ahead of time. What is going on where they can plan that ahead of time? It's not just maintenance, or what is going on?
No, it was not planned ahead of time.
Oh, it's not.
Because
okay.
by the kind of statements that the officials are putting out on Twitter, it seems ESCOM, as per ESCOM, which is the state utility there, it seems like they are also in a state of surprise. But when I talk to my friends there, they are telling me that it's like due to corruption within the ESCOM, where a lot of money has disappeared, and the transmission networks and everything is out of state, and there's no maintenance. And South Africa is exporting coal, but ESCOM doesn't want to use coal. So it's crazy, and ESCOM is sold out to the climate narrative as well.
Okay.
So how can you do that? Like they are not providing electricity to their people, and simultaneously they are saying that they are going to transition into renewables. So like anyone who knows how renewables function, and why they cannot provide you electricity, will only laugh at ESCOM, because it's like so the number of hours in which they don't provide electricity is changing on an everyday basis. So there is 7 hours of blackout on a certain day. The next day there is 5 hours, and then 8 hours it changes. And so people's social media statuses are on what they are doing during the load shedding hours, which is crazy to see in this century. Like, so but again, that brings us to the situation in Africa, with South Africa being the most developed, at least in a general sense. And you have Nigeria again, which is the fastest growing economy in Africa. I mean, the largest, not necessarily the fastest growing. They're the largest economy, and you have like half the people not have reliable electricity. So that's the state of this. Again, we must emphasize it as a continent every time we speak about it. Else we tend to shrink it to just a country in our head, and we just think, well, Africa doesn't have power. Well, we're talking about a continent with a lot of countries, and people in astute poverty. It's not like they are like people in the US and UK, where they can manage with a few hours of blackout or a couple of days of a blackout due to flood or a hurricane. Yes, it's bad. It's nobody wants to be in that situation, but people here can bounce back easily. But here you have lifelong impact. Like if there's no economy in your village or your town, it changes your whole life.
Okay. Is there any other points you'd like to make here? Or what?
No, I'm good. Yeah. I'm good.
Okay.
I'm open to discuss anything, but yeah.
Okay. All right. I think maybe for now, this is a good stopping point, but this has been really interesting for me. I learned a lot talking to you. I really think your perspective is valuable coming from where you are, and knowing what you know. I think it's great to hear from you. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah. And before I have to mention that your tweets are really good, and finally it's good to, I've never seen your picture, so finally good to see you face to face. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you next time.
Cheers. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.